In 1901, two English women, Charlotte and Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, went on vacation to France, where they toured many historical sites, including the Palace of Versailles. At the end of the main part of the tour, they decided to visit Petit Trianon, the castle given by King Louis XVI to his wife Marie Antoinette, but on their way to this famous structure, the ladies got lost in the woods. Noticing two men in green jackets and triangular hats, they hurried to them, hoping to clarify their path. Charlotte and Eleanor assumed that they were gardeners, and even thought that their unusual clothing might be a stylization of Marie Antoinette's era. Thus, they marveled at how accurately the men managed to convey the images of French soldiers of the late 18th century. However, when the women reached Petit Trianon, a surprising picture opened up before them. In front of the castle, they noticed many people dressed in ancient clothes and speaking an unknown French dialect. Eleanor later described it in her notes, "I felt as if I were in a dream." The unreality of what was happening was beginning to press. Finally, we found a path crossing our path and the structure appeared before us, blending in with the trees and surrounded by columns. On the steps sat a man, all in black, with a soft hat on his head. The mysterious feeling reached its climax and turned into fear. The man slowly turned to face me, turning his back completely. The expression on his face was sinister and haughty. I hurriedly walked past. Suddenly the tourists noticed a beautiful aristocrat on the palace terrace, busy sketching in a sketchbook. She was dressed in a gorgeous long dress, with a powdered wig, like Marie Antoinette herself. The next moment the woman raised her head and looked bewilderedly at Charlotte and Eleanor, who were bewildered at the sight of the Queen. In a few seconds the landscape around them changed completely, the strange vision vanished, and the women found themselves among a crowd of modern tourists strolling in front of the Petit Trianon. Charlotte and Eleanor were in such a dazed state that for another week they could not lift their tongues to speak of what had happened to them. But the incredible adventure never left their minds, and they decided to delve into the history of France. They were surprised to discover that they were in the era before the French Revolution. 10 years later, they even wrote a book about this amazing experience. To this day, historians debate whether this was a mystical journey into the past or just a fanciful fantasy of two English women who wanted to leave their mark on history. Sometimes time travelers can literally fall out of the sky on us. This is exactly what happened in 1996 in a picturesque corner near Cape South Foreland. Suddenly, Englishwoman Martha Crawford heard the roar of the engines of an approaching airplane. The sound grew louder and louder, and alarm gripped the woman, causing her to run to the window. The next second, an incredible sight unfolded before her eyes. A Curtiss P-40 fighter jet, one of the most famous planes in the U.S. Air Force during World War II, Martha said, was landing in the immediate vicinity of her home. Martha didn't know much about aviation, but her irritation exceeded her expectations when she saw that someone had dared to disturb the integrity of her perfect lawn. She ran out of the house and cursed the pilot. But he was barely on his feet, pale as death and unresponsive to Martha's angry shouts. She soon realized that he needed help and called the family doctor. While waiting to see the doctor, she began to ask the wanderer questions, and he struggled to tell her a remarkable story. The man, who introduced himself as John Walker, a military pilot in the U.S. Air Force, shared an amazing story. During an air battle over France, his squadron was suddenly attacked by German Messerschmitts, Nazi bombers. Fighting alongside his comrades, John and his crew discovered they were out of ammunition. Deciding to go for a ramming attack, his fighter collided with a German airplane. In an attempt to escape, John opened the cockpit lantern in preparation for a parachute jump, but suddenly lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself in the same plane a few meters from the ground. Showing all his flying skills, John managed to successfully land the plane on Martha's lawn. But until now, he couldn't understand how he had ended up here. The doctor who arrived, hearing this incredible story, decided that the pilot had a serious mental disorder. After some time, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. This incident caused a great stir in the press, and journalists began to get to the truth. Especially distinguished in this reporter James O'Hara. He carefully studied the archives and found out that the Curtiss P-40, which landed on Cape South Foreland, really belonged to the 123rd Cover Squadron of the U.S. Air Force during World War II. On April 9, 1944, Lieutenant John Walker was given an important assignment, to go with his squadron to support the British Air Force. On the way, however, they were ambushed by German Messerschmitts. The entire 123rd Squadron was destroyed that day, but the wreckage of John Walker's plane, and his body, was never found. Thus, the pilot was reported missing for 50 years. It is also interesting that journalists managed to find John Walker's personnel file. Looking at the photo attached to it, they were amazed even more. The man in the picture was like 2 drops of water, similar to the pilot whose plane irreparably damaged Mrs. Crawford's favorite lawn. Incredibly, another mysterious story took place in 1992 in Caracas, Venezuela. Dispatchers spotted an unusual airplane approaching the airport. It was a 4-engine Douglas DC 4-piston airliner, a model that had been discontinued back in 1947. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact the pilot by radio, dispatchers finally managed to get a response. The pilot reported that he was flying charter flight 914 from New York to Miami and planned to land on June 2, 1955, at 9:55 a.m. local time. However, his message was met only with silence. Sensing something strange, the pilot clarified, "Where are we now?" Dispatchers replied that he was flying over Caracas and gave permission to land. The pilot began his descent, and the next second the dispatchers heard his surprised exclamation, clearly addressed to the co-pilot, "Jimmy. What the hell is that?" According to radar data, the plane flew past them at the same moment. The mysterious plane landed safely. However, it wasn't until afterward that the dispatchers decided to inform the pilot that it was 1992. His surprise was immense, and he exclaimed, "Something is wrong. Something is definitely wrong here." Trying to reassure him, they informed him that a ground rescue team was on its way to help. But this alarmed the pilot even more. Seeing people approaching his plane, he shouted, "Stay back. We're taking off." A few seconds later, he started the engines again and lifted his plane into the air. After that, the strange DC-4 was never seen again.